President Iván Duque of Colombia, thanks so much for taking the time to join us during a crazy week.
Thank you so much, Ian. It's a great pleasure to be with you again.
So, usually right now we'd be together. We certainly are not. Things kind of crazy with the pandemic, lockdown, economic contraction. Whose country is more screwed up right now, mine or yours?
Well, I think this has been a great tragedy for the world, Ian. I think nobody in the world was prepared of something of this magnitude. And I think so far, the most important thing is that we have been able, your country, my country, and maybe the whole world, to try to maneuver in the midst of the circumstances and try to adopt the right measures of distancing, using masks, and at the same time of changing social behavior. And but I'm optimistic. I think we all have suffered, but I'm optimistic that we will all recover as faster as possible.
So is that a diplomatic way of saying my country's a little more screwed up right now?
Well, you're a good analyst, Ian, and I think you have evaluated what's going on everywhere in the world, and you know that precisely in the Western Hemisphere, since we're more democratic nations and we are more liberal nations, we have suffered more, especially in comparison to societies that have a millenarian tradition of social distancing and have more maybe rigorous procedures to ensure people's behavior. So I think this has been a challenge for the liberal democracy. But as I say, I'm optimistic because I think our societies have behaved in a way that we all acknowledge that in order to protect everyone, we have to protect ourselves. And it's individual discipline what is going to make us maneuver this circumstance.
So, as you're talking to your peers, other heads of state over these weeks, obviously the pandemic is front and center completely. But I'm wondering what's specifically dominating these conversations. To what extent is it the vaccine? To what extent is it the economy? To what extent is it just the question of how you're personally each dealing with such a dramatically different set of circumstances? Tell me how those conversations have changed over the last few months.
Well, I'm going to be very blunt in this response. And I guess we all believe, and I know you're a true believer in multilateralism, but if I were to evaluate what has happened in the last 6 months, I think at the beginning of this pandemic, multilateralism didn't work as it should. And because I think if we all had acknowledged what's really going on in Asia, maybe we would have taken more faster draconian measures to protect the world and maybe try to prevent the exponential expansion of the pandemic. So I think that's a takeout. And the second thing is, obviously, when we all started responding to the circumstances, we saw a lot of individual decisions that had an impact on the availability of ventilators, even on tests and other matters. So I think that's also a takeout. But I also think that as we have evolved in the last 6 months, I think we have increased our level of coordination, and we have seen that now there's more support between countries as accessing to tests, and at the same time creating a world coalition for the access to a vaccine, as has happened with COVAX and Gavi, and at the same time being able to share epidemiological and infectological information. So I think we got some negative takeouts on why multilateralism didn't work as it should at the beginning. But I think now the levels of coordination are increasing, and are increasing for the positive. And when we have the conversations between heads of state, I think we all are trying to support each other. For example, we announced with Chile that we both joined COVAX to access to the vaccine, and we have all been working also with the World Health Organization to be one of the first countries where there's medical testing of eventual vaccines. So I think on the positive side, what went wrong at the beginning, it's now being used as a lesson to increase coordination.
When so much of what you're doing now has become virtual, which are the relationships that you've been surprised that have actually become the strongest? You one-on-one with other leaders. Where have you been able to really make diplomatic progress when you're at a distance?
Well, that's a great question, because when we saw the pandemic taking speed 5 months ago, I think we all felt that not only multilateralism, but the capability of exchanging ideas and coordination policies was going to be more complex. But I must mention that maybe I haven't had so many meetings in multilateral and bilateral way with other heads of state as I have done it in the last 5 months. And it's really impressive because I think we have used technology so that we can shorten distances, but at the same time, it has made conversations also more informal and more practical. We have organized more than 4 or 5 presidential meetings in Prosur, where we have 7 presidents and we all sit together and we all share ideas and we all coordinate policies. And the same thing has happened in the Andean community. For example, we moved forward with Israel, building our free trade agreement. We have had meetings with heads of state from Europe participating in a coordination meeting to support the Venezuelan migrants. So if you ask me, I think I have had more meetings with heads of state in this 6 months than what I regularly will do in a semester, because it was mostly tied to a person-to-person connection. So I think technology has helped us close distances, and at the same time use technology in a more informal and faster way to coordinate elements. And we saw it, for example, in the election of the IDB. We saw it in the election of the OAS. We have seen it in the way we have approached the policy coordination for vaccination programs. So I think this is going to become also a new rule in terms of diplomacy, that yes, face-to-face connections are very important, but at the same time, we should use more technology to engage with our peers.
So make it personal. I mean, who's a leader that before the pandemic hit, you really didn't know at all, and now you guys are fast friends, and it's surprising to you?
Well, I have had a good relationship with many of my colleague presidents in South America, but I think we have been able to be talking on a permanent basis with President Piñera from Chile, President Vizcarra from Peru, President Abdo from Paraguay. I've also had conversations with President Lacalle from Uruguay. And I think we have remained talking on a permanent basis. And I think in an informal way to say it, I think we were all colleagues, we were all friends, but I think in heading and facing this crisis, we have become what you call it in the United States in a friendly way, buddies. Because I think we have been able to share not only our expectations as head of state, but also our human understanding of the circumstances. And I value that, because I think when we get more closer in terms of person-to-person connection, dealing with this such an unprecedented event in the world, I think it also allows us to do things much better and to learn not only from the success, but from the failures of others.
Let me go directly to Colombia, because of course, early on, you got a lot of praise for shutting down Colombia expeditiously, for no-nonsense talk with the Colombian people, very effective lockdown. Obviously, like so many other countries in the world, this disease persists. And Colombia, you now are, I think, 5th in the world in terms of cases, over 750,000. Economy taking a big hit. Unemployment rate has doubled to 20%. You've had some protests in Colombia too, a lot of uncertainty. How do you balance the public health versus the real need of the people in a developing economy to work and earn a living at this point in the crisis?
Well, that's a great question, Ian, and I'll try to separate each one of the issues that you mentioned. On the health sector, we always understood that we need to work rapidly and we need to take draconian measures. And we needed to take measures that could have a balance between protecting health and protecting life, and at the same time protecting employment and protecting social and economic development. And the first decisions we made was to reduce the exponential expansion of the virus, and at the same time allow us to expand not only testing, but the capacities for critical treatment. So when we evaluate what has been done in the last 6 months in Colombia, on the one hand, we were the first country in Latin America that had the capability of doing COVID-19 tests. But we only had one lab that could process 1,000 tests per day. Today, we have more than 100 labs throughout the country, and we're processing around 36,000 tests per day. So we have become one of the countries in Latin America with the higher testing, and that's important. And we started doing it early. The second thing is we have expanded the ICU capacity like no time before in our history. It took us decades to get to 5,400 ICUs when the pandemic began, and we were one of the countries with a higher density of ICUs. Today, we have more than 10,000, so we have also expanded the capacity to attend critical treatment. And the most important thing is we have been reopening or recovering productive life since day one. Since the day we made the decree of the general isolation, we had 40% of the economy running, and we were expanding that recovery so that by the 1st of September, we had 90% of the economy already in place. Today we have more than 95%. So when you ask me, how does this look in terms of health? When we compare lethality rates in Colombia with Europe, our lethality rate is around 3.1, 3.2%, which is below Germany, below Italy, below France, below the US, below Belgium, below Sweden, and that's important. Now, when we also do comparatives on deaths per million, in terms of deaths per million, we are below the US, we are below the UK, we are below France, we are below Italy, we are below Peru, we are below Chile, we are below Mexico, we are below Brazil, and that's also a very important statement that we should make. And when it comes to contagions per million, we are below many of the countries that we compare with in Latin America. So I think we have been able to maneuver throughout this difficult circumstance. Today, we have almost 84% of the population that has been affected by COVID-19 recovered, and we have been able to minimize and reduce the negative impact on the economy. Still hard, but we have been able to recover, and I have a good optimistic perspective for the last quarter of this year, and our plan for 2021 is that we're going to grow above 5%.
So, none of this happens in isolation. If it was just the pandemic that we were dealing with, it would be hard enough. In my country, of course, we also have the complicating factor of elections. We also have all this social instability, all this racial dissent. You and I have talked at length about one of the biggest challenges that your country has had since well before the pandemic, which are all of these refugees, well over 1 million, coming from neighboring Venezuela, which is just in free fall. It's just collapsing, and yet it's not in any way getting resolved. Now, in the last few months, we've seen about 100,000 of those refugees have gone back to Venezuela, reported, in part because there just isn't jobs for them, in part because there's, sort of xenophobia, there's anti-Venezuelan sentiment. How are you addressing that? How do you respond to it?
Well, let me also mention something that I consider has been important for us in the midst of the pandemic. I mentioned the measures that we took in terms of health, but it's also interesting to look at the measures we took to protect the bottom of the pyramid, the poorest of the poor, and how we have also reacted to protect migrants. So in Colombia, we expanded the conditional cash transfer program so that we can have an extra bonus for the families that are around 2.7 million families that continuously receive the conditional cash transfers. But we also launched a program so that we could reach those persons in the bottom of the pyramid, the poorest of the poor, that had never received a penny from the state or a subsidy, so that we can contribute so that they could find food and they could attend some of their daily necessities. And basically, I think we also made something very important because we reached 3 million families that never before had received any subsidy or income derived from the state. And we also expanded the programs to protect the elderly that were in vulnerable conditions. So today we have 100% coverage of people above 70 years old that are in vulnerability levels so that they also receive resources to attend the circumstance. But we also created a program with the private sector and individual donors that allowed us to give 1 million grocery packages, family packages, so that they could pass the storm with enough food. And we also created another program with the state with an additional 1 million of family food packages. And when we talk about early childhood, and this is very important, children that were going to the nutritional centers used to get nutrition daily on a daily basis, but we decided to expand the program, taking the food to their home so that we give the food to the kid, but we also supported the family. So we had a lot of migrants that received resources in these circumstances. But something that has also been important is that we decided to subsidize 40% of the payroll of companies that had lost their income 20% or more, so that we can provide that resource and we stop the losing of jobs. And something that, in addition to that, we launched a program of 90% loan guarantees from the state. So the social package that we put together to attend the crisis has been very important. And in the case of migrants, we know that some people went back to Venezuela, but primarily to attend their families, because they were losing some of their family members. We know that the situation in Venezuela is very complex, and that we might have another inflow of migrants pretty soon, especially because there's a lack of vaccination, lack of food, and lack of many other necessities, and people would like to look at Colombia as a safe haven. But we know that this is unsustainable from our side, although we have tried to keep our fraternity policy in place. So maybe my reflection is, we've tried to attend the necessities of many of the people that have been suffering a lot in this circumstance. It's very difficult to please everyone, but we know that we're trying to do our best so that we can have a solid social safety net.
I mean, you said at the opening that multilateralism in response to coronavirus in the early days really was absent, really failed. Has multilateralism failed in Venezuela? What would you call on? What does the United States need to do that it hasn't? What other countries need to do that they haven't to help resolve this problem?
I will separate the issues in the Western Hemisphere and with the rest of the international community. We have received a lot of support from USAID, and I think it has become a state policy, and I praise that and I value that a lot, because the U.S. has been the country that has put more resources to attend this crisis. And we have been able to create some centers for nutritional attention in the border zones with the help of USAID. We have also received resources to attend health coverage for some of the migrants. So I think the U.S. has put a lot of resources there. But I think when it comes to the rest of the world and the rest of the international community, definitely we see good intentions. But we don't see the good intentions coming with the enough pledges of resources to attend the magnitude of this crisis. People refer to the Syrian crisis as the biggest migration crisis that we have seen in recent history. And we're talking about 6 million migrants. Well, in the case of Venezuela, I think we're going to surpass the number of 6 million maybe by the end of this year or early 2021. And when we look at the resources that have been assigned or appropriated per migrant in the case of the Syrian crisis, we're talking about sums that are around, that are above $1,000. And when we look at what has happened in the case of Venezuela, the contribution has been of less than $200 per migrant. So there needs to be a clear mobilization of resources. And the reason is because although we have kept a fraternity policy in terms of the fiscal pressure that it creates for a country like Colombia, we need to receive more support. And I said that in the last donor conference that we had, that was organized by the Spanish government with the participation of the UN and the OAS. We need to do much more there. And it's not just about money. It's about money, but it's about the way that we can focus the resources to attend the biggest pressure, which is nutrition, healthcare, and housing.
Last question for you. Is Juan Guaido still the best hope for the Venezuelan opposition, for the Venezuelan people?
Well, Ian, let me say this bluntly. Sometimes I just don't understand when I see in the world sometimes questioning whether he's the right guy or the wrong guy, because Juan Guaido is the expression of true democracy in Venezuela. And when I say true democracy is because he was appointed by the National Assembly, that is the only democratic organ, the only democratic instrument or institution that the world has recognized in Venezuela to be legitimate. But let's say it also bluntly. Juan Guaido is a demonstration of bravery, but we cannot expect that Juan Guaido on his own, he's going to defeat a dictator that has been called recently by the UN, that we did it before, as a criminal against humanity. He has a group of cronies that work hand in hand with the business of narco trafficking, that don't have any respect for human rights. And Juan Guaido has been chased. His family has been chased. The opposition has been chased. The resistance has been imprisoned. So I think instead, for us of being spectators and analysts about his temper, his character, or even his bravery, I think what we should all do is give as much support as possible, not only to Juan Guaido, but to the assembly, so that four things are met. On the one hand, the dictatorship needs to end, because Maduro is a criminal against humanity. I said it last year talking with you that he is the Latin American equivalent of Slobodan Milosevic. And it was proven last week by the UN, and even the UN referred that he should go to the International Criminal Court. The second thing that needs to happen is that there needs to be a transitionary government with a broad participation. It's not just the resistance, it's not just the Chavistas. They both have to sit together, and they both have to lead the transitionary government so that there is a call for a free election. And there needs to be an agreement for that free election, that whoever wins, it could be the resistance, it could be the Chavistas, whoever wins will have the support of the other side, so that we can put together a national economic and social recovery plan. I think that should be the plan that we all have to work to put together in Venezuela.
So who's gone first, Maduro or Assad?
Well, I hope both go out together. And I think the world needs to see Maduro out of office, and the world needs to see Assad out of office. They both are criminals against humanity. And I think the world has demonstrated that when we all unite without common purpose, those things can happen. And I think we should not remain just as observers or as spectators. I think the whole world needs to act. And I think the world pressure, if it works, it could allow both countries to see a light at the end of the tunnel. Because countries that have been brutalized by dictatorships and by criminals against humanity destroy not only the human, but the social and economic capital. We have seen how the destruction has affected so badly Venezuela, and we have also seen how the destruction has affected so badly Syria. But sometimes it's sad that there is a lack of consensus among the stronger countries in the world, that those circumstances need to come to an end. And I hope that in an optimistic view of multilateralism, both things can happen for the goodwill of the world.
President of Colombia, Iván Duque, far away but yet surprisingly intimate. Always good to see you, my friend.